Well, welcome to Cheetah House. For those of you who don't know, Cheetah House is a nonprofit organization that provides research-based information and support to people who have had confusing, distressing, or traumatic experiences with meditation and/or meditation or spiritual communities. Today, we are having our second episode of Meet a Cheetah, where the Cheetah House care team members tell their story so that you can get to know them better. Today's star of Meet a Cheetah is Mandy Johnson. So we are going to hear from Mandy. Mandy, welcome.
Lovely, thank you. And it's so lovely to see so many people and also people that I've worked with, just lovely. And the rest are very welcome. So thanks for.
So let's start off like from the beginning. So before meditation made an appearance in your life, like who were you? What were you doing? What were your interests? What did you have a job? What did you study in school? Like tell us about Mandy.
Yeah, I mean, I had a whole life before meditation, it feels like. And that certainly was a splitting and a trajectory into an opposite path. But I grew up in a very small town, very simply, very interested in silly things like sport and I was an imaginative child. I was curious and playful, and at the same time, really, really obsessed with why are we here, who is God, and what is death at a very young age, which is very, very weird for a young child, very concerning. But a deep understanding that I looked around me and thought, this isn't really the safest place that I thought, what have I been born into, you know? But when I hit school, I flourished. I loved school. I loved all things school. I loved studying, academics, sports. It was like a safe haven for me. Complete and utter type A. Never need to ask me to do homework. And I think, Willoughby, you know that about me now. Never needed to worry about a test. If I was studying for a spelling test, I'd study for 8 hours. When I was a little person ready for spelling test, I was a nightmare type A student. Um, but it was really just a place to escape to. And I was interested in things like the junior town council and being a prefect and worrying about why people were being hurt and why people were poor and what we could do about it before when I was 13. So I took on a lot of responsibility, and as a result of that, also started working when I was young. I had my first job when I was 13, rewinding video cassettes in a little video shop. And I fell in love with movies. So I did it for very, very little money, but I just fell in love with movies and escaping into movies. And that started my love and my lifelong love for books and reading also, and narratives and stories. Um, so yeah, that was when I was after high school, straight into UCT, at the University of Cape Town, and did my undergraduate there, and again excelled, but had to start working. I had to get a job and to try and support some of the family and stuff that was going on. So yeah, I started working at a young age, and couldn't find work, so I started in sales, and for some reason really did well in sales and marketing, and ended up being a senior account manager. I went overseas and worked in contract publishing for a long time. It feels like a completely different life. And then ended up in some of the senior big newspaper organizations in South Africa and went right to the top to account management and sales management with huge portfolios, 60 million annual portfolios, and actually getting those targets, which was really they were difficult, but I thrived. Unfortunately, being a type A, I pushed myself, and at 41, 42, I was diagnosed with cancer. And that was the first serious scream in my life. There were many whispers, but the cancer diagnosis was time to stop, time to reflect. And that's really when I'd already been studying towards coaching and psychology and my meditation journey and whatever. But that was the stop for me. So a whole life before meditation, Willoughby. A whole life.
And so what was the cancer the reason that you got into meditation? Like what drew you that direction?
So at the age of about 31, I experienced my first full-blown panic attack. So that I'd had a lot of anxiety as a child growing up. Anxiety was always with me. But at 31, it was just after my mom passed. So my mom had really a lot of struggles with her mental health. Um, in my late teens, probably right from the beginning, actually, if I think back, but certainly in my late teens and early 20s, it deteriorated substantially. And so for my 20s, I had to basically, I had to look after her, care for her, make sure she had I was paying for everything. Let's just put it that way. And so I was working, trying to sort her out and dealing with a whole lot of my own stuff. And that's when my panic started getting worse and worse. And just after she died, I had my first full blown panic attack at work. And I'll never forget it because I was just thinking, I'm sitting at my desk and the whole like room was spinning, everything was spinning. I thought I was going to die. I thought I was having a heart attack. I left work, got into the car, and I was driving, and I pulled over, and a friend said to me, come to her house. And as I arrived at her house, there was this magazine next to it, and I pulled the magazine and opened it up, and there it said, are you stressed and burnt out? Come to an MBSR class. I was like, oh wow, I think I'm going to phone right now. And I phoned the number, and the man that answered, I said to him, I'll never forget, I said to him, I think I'm having a nervous breakdown. And he said to me, wow, it's the calmest nervous breakdown I've ever heard, because it was almost like I was having a nervous breakdown, but I could still tell him I was having a nervous breakdown, you know. And it was a surreal moment. And the rest is history. I went in to see him and ended up on my first MBSR class. And so that's where the journey started of MBSR myself.
Mhm.
But I'll tell you as that progressed. But by 42, I'd been practicing mindfulness, but it was starting to get a little obsessive. It was starting to, or it was already taking a dark turn. You know, it wasn't just 10 minutes or 20 minutes of practice. Um, yeah, does that answer it?
Yeah, so let's talk about that first class. So, for those of you who don't know, MBSR stands for Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction, and it's an 8-week course that was designed by John Kabat-Zinn. And it's basically taken over the world as the kind of main mindfulness-based program that's used in science and medicine, and it has also branched out to mindfulness-based cognitive therapy and a whole bunch of mindfulness for X, you name it. It's usually coming from MBSR. So Mandy was drawn into that particular kind of type of practice. And so what was that like, that first 8-week program like for you?
The one thing I remember, I'm very lucky because I had two very gentle, kind teachers, and I think that made all the difference. However, I do believe I probably, in light of what I now know, was not a good candidate for that program. If I'd done a pre-course interview on myself, I wouldn't have been a good candidate for it, just in light of all the trauma stuff I was going through, having just lost my mom and my own panic attacks and a whole lot of host of other things. Anyhow, I went, thank goodness they were kind teachers. But I remember two things that stood out for me. One is an absolute sheer panic of lying down in a room with a whole lot of strangers around me and having to close my eyes just based on my own past trauma experience. That was just not happening for me. I was really dysregulated. I didn't know I was dysregulated. Didn't know what was happening, but I was frozen. And I didn't even do any body scan, didn't even know what they were doing. I thought it was completely insane. All I was trying to do was just survive, breathe, breathe, breathe. That was really difficult. And I remember the first 1 day retreat that we went to. There were all these strangers sitting, you know, in very like on formal sort of cushions and very zen-like. And I just really didn't want to do it. Didn't want to sit in that position, didn't want to do it. I always remember I used to sort of, even right late in meditation, I wanted to sit against a wall. I wanted a wall behind me for safety. I didn't want to sit in the middle. So I allowed myself that. Sorry, guys. Let me just do this. Take a breath. Yeah, I didn't want to sit in the middle of a group of people. So that was the one thing. The second thing that really got me on that retreat was by about the third hour of silence, I knew that I couldn't make it. It was too much silence. And I
And
hadn't
this
done
was the
enough.
meditation, this was the retreat that was part of the MBSR program,
The
the one
MBSR program,
day.
I think it's session 7. I mean, we both have been teachers. I think it's just after session 6, session 7. you do the 1-day retreat. And so what I did is I just left, and I remember sitting in my car, and I share the story often, and I shared it with my participants when I taught MBSR. I put rock music on really, really loud so that I could just have some form of external input to try and to not lose it, to not like totally fragment, because that's what it felt like was going to happen. So, I mean, it was a pretty interesting first experience, but what I what I said to you, Willoughby, when you asked me were there any benefits to that first program, and what was a benefit was, for the first time in my life, I felt that my thoughts, feelings, and body sensations weren't entirely, I wasn't wrapped up in them. There was a little bit of space from it. And that was life enhancing for me. So I wasn't just completely a bundle of anxiety, thoughts, and catastrophic hyperarousal. I could step back a bit. And that really did change a lot for me. And I'm so grateful to that. I will always be grateful for that, just to have a little bit of space. So in that sense, that's the one benefit of the program.
Well, and it sounds like it was beneficial enough that you decided to become a teacher in that
Mm.
tradition. So, yeah, tell us about that. Is that the next chapter?
It's the next chapter. So the first program I taught was actually mindfulness-based relapse prevention, because what I became more and more interested in was recovery work. And the training that we did in South Africa, it was a postgraduate training, allowed us only to teach MBSR. Only clinicians are allowed to teach MBCT. But I was allowed to teach mindfulness-based relapse prevention. And when I started teaching that program, I recognized right up front, and I told my supervisor at the time, that this program isn't trauma informed. Something is not right with this program. People are having really bad reactions, session 2, session 3. And I didn't understand why. It's a lovely program, but I didn't understand why. And I think it just drops people too deep too quickly, especially people in recovery who are already, really on the edge of relapse. So that was the first program I taught. But yes, I thought that mindfulness, when I went into the training, was a secular program. It was evidence-based, it was scientific, it was taught in the Faculty of Medicine. And I thought it was a natural fit for the postgraduate coaching program that I was doing, which was Mandy emotions-focused recovery coaching. I thought, okay, this is a perfect fit. Let me do these programs together. And I really, really taught from the perspective of being, my pre-course interviews were asking people the right questions in terms of, these are the things I believe. Don't go into a program if you've just got divorced, if you've just lost a family member, if you are suffering with an anxiety disorder, that if you are on chronic medication and you're using drugs and alcohol. Or like, I really used to be firm about my pre-course interviews back then already, because I recognized in myself that you have to be. And so that was something that I thought was important. But what happened with mindfulness for me and teaching MBSR, we ran good programs, but I recognized some things in the programs just didn't feel, I didn't know what trauma-informed was. We were never trained in trauma-informed mindfulness, but I could see it in the programs that people were struggling. For example, that those Aikido exercises where you have to do the Aikido practices. You know this, if you're MBSR teachers, you'll know what I mean. Those for me triggered a lot of people in the groups, people that had suffered before some sort of a relational abuse or dynamics. They didn't work for people, and I didn't know what to do with that, actually. So yeah, that's how I became an MBSR teacher. And for the most part, I hope I didn't do any harm. I hope I did good work. That was my experience, Willoughby. And, I know then things started to change.
And I remember there was a retreat. Is that, I wonder if that's the next chapter. Because the next question is, when did things start to change for you? And I remember that being, but it sounds like there were already inklings well
Mm.
before that.
Mm.
So yeah, tell us about that.
So first of all, I just want to rewind a little bit, just in terms of personality and in terms of ACA and what that means. So just give me 2 seconds. I just want to do this.
Sure.
Don't know why my throat's closing up. It's really interesting. Um, So during the period just after my mom passed and I got into MBSR, I also recognized that I went to a talk and for the first time I'd heard the term adult children of alcoholics and I heard the term codependency. I had never understood what those meant. I'd been to therapy to try and deal with some of this childhood stuff, but never really, it was never named as those two terms. But when I heard those and I started understanding them, I recognized every single pattern in me. And it was really a wake up call for me. I was so grateful. I went into inpatient treatment when I was 32, 33. So this is all sort of as an adjunct to the MBSR. It was all happening at once. I just started studying again, just heard about codependency, went inpatient treatment. And so codependency for me in ACA, there's certain behaviors that you use that would set you up to be extremely compliant later down the line and almost get involved in cult-like dynamics and new agey things. It almost sets you up for that. One is this sort of excessive people pleasing or addiction to drama or seeking validation, excessive perfectionism, um, very poor boundaries, porous boundaries. And these things set me up for like the perfect storm of pushing too hard in meditation, because that's what happened. So I was driving along, I was working too hard, I was studying, I'd just done MBSR, and then I decided I wanted to deep dive into some of the non-dual practices. I wanted to start understanding if I'm going to do MBSR, I need to really get it. And I had never heard about Dharma or Sangha in my life, never been exposed to it, didn't understand it. And I thought, okay, it's time for a deep dive. You really need to get this now. You need to study this. You need to understand it. And I found a non-dual teacher and driving along in between my appointments as a sales manager, I heard the statement that blew my brain, which was, I just can't live with myself. So who's the I and who's the self I can't live with? And I'm sorry if that's triggering for people in this room, but I'm just naming it because that statement changed everything. It's like I had to pull the car over and I thought, have I just like broken the code for what's been going wrong with me all my life? Who's the I and who's the self I can't live with? And so I wanted to discover who the I was. What's consciousness? And it was a dangerous path for me because it became extremely compulsive. And so what was a 10-minute or 20-minute nourishing practice suddenly became a let's go to sort of the Buddhist center, let's start dabbling in these practices, let's start with 3 hours, let's go to 4 hours, let's maybe do 5 hours, which was at the end of before I went on my 30-day retreat. Why not? Let's try lucid dreaming, let's just try all of it. And my personality of pushing too hard, wanting to know too hard, and even in supervision, I was naming it. And the thing is, it's kind of really encouraged in the circles of meditation teaching or mindfulness teachers to be up with the Dharma and to really know the stuff. And as a compliant, wanting to do good person in the job that I do, which is teach MBSR, I just pushed too hard. And so what happened was by the time I found you, Willoughby, I decided I'm going on a 30-day silent retreat. And the precursor to that silent retreat was a catastrophic 3-month online retreat with another non-dual teacher, which we were doing about 5 hours a day. And one morning I woke up so dysregulated and with ringing in my ears, like I thought I was going to go mad. I had severe tinnitus, which was, I don't know how it was activated, but it certainly was related to that retreat. It was a precursor to that happening. And I've been through a lot in my life, cancer, sort of childhood trauma and stuff, but nothing prepares you for that level of distress because I just did not know what to do with it. As an anxious person, it was just getting louder and louder. And based on that, I still decided to go on this 30-day silent retreat. So I was completely dysregulated, even before the retreat. But I didn't listen to myself. Like, I think I can just push through. I've learned now that that's not an option.
Well,
But back
maybe like,
then,
maybe the retreat will fix this problem. That's another common one, right? Like, oh, I'm having all this stress and I'm just went through some major trauma. I'm going to go on retreat because it sounds like a vacation, right?
It does. I mean, it was in the mountains and it was just sold as this beautiful. I mean, I had one or two conversations with the retreat leaders, and I said, first of all, I'm not a Buddhist and it's a Buddhist retreat. And I made that clear. And I said, second of all, like I'm going through some stuff. It's like 50. It's like I'm struggling with my joints. I'm struggling with lots of heat waves, power surges. Um, it's tricky. And she said, well, look, we don't have a private room or anything. We don't have like a separate room. You're going to just have to sleep in the dorm. And I was like, okay, well, if that's what we have to do, that's what we have to do. I want to do this retreat. But I was not prepared for what I was about to step into. I was not prepared. Even I mean, I'd been teaching MBSR for 7 or 8 years by then, so I'd done a lot of meditation and I wasn't new to this, but that retreat, nothing would have prepared me for it.
So let's
The
hear it.
fallout
What
was
happened?
big. So the first thing that happened was someone picked me up at the airport and there were a whole lot of people and we were in this sort of like little bus and off we go. It's 3.5 hours to the retreat. And in South Africa, particularly this road, I mean, the roads are really, really bad. And it started getting late and it started getting dark and it was a storm. It was a rainy, rainy night. And I was really, really nervous about the travel. My dad died in a car accident when I was 12. So car accidents for me are top of mind always. And I just had a feeling there was going to be an accident. I was not feeling safe in that. I was getting more and more and more freaked out. It was dark. The roads were full of potholes. I thought, what are we dealing with? And as we came around the corner, just before the retreat, a car had flipped over. It was almost like it was just bound to happen. And we kind of had to stop there, so we were trying to help them, and then we got late to the retreat. People were waiting for us, and we'd heard all of this. So it was just there was a lot going on before we even arrived, and we arrived late. It was raining, and then you go to these like this little sort of rondavel, like little thing, and then they say, okay, well, you just need to walk like a kilometer or two to your place. Someone will kind of just walk together through this like dark bush kind of vibe late at night. I was like, okay, it's not sounding good, but let's do it. And so off we went, and they said, just watch, don't worry about like if you hear barking, that's just the baboons in the background, and don't worry about the bats, and don't worry about, there are puff adders, but don't worry about those. I was like, okay, this is not working for me right now. I was so freaked. I just wanted to go home. I thought, this is not, no. It's not what I signed up for. And as we got into the room, they said to me, okay, your bunk is kind of in the middle, like in the corner there. There's your bunk, and then everybody else is around you. It was just, I don't know what I thought I was doing, because I thought, well, I think I slept with all my clothes on the first night. I didn't even want to get into the bedding. And then, you wake up super, super early and you straight into meditation. There's like, no, it's just straight in 6 o'clock. So it didn't start off well. And the reason I give you that context is because what started happening is old trauma stuff started coming up before the retreat even started. The car accident triggered something about my dad. The bats and the baboons triggered something about, we used to have bats as kids. Now I had this fierce memory of absolute terror of bats. Like there used to be this thing that they fly into your hair and then you can't get them out. Like all this childhood stuff started coming out. I was like, what is going on with you, Mandy? You're an adult woman, calm down. But I became more and more sort of, I don't know what it is. I almost felt like I was regressing. And I was sitting and sitting and sitting and sweat. I had like this unbelievable amount of sweating going on, like heat waves. I couldn't regulate my body temperature. And everybody else was sitting in those calm, Zen-like positions, chanting and doing all of it. And all I was doing, sitting in the middle, trying to hide behind a pillar so that I didn't have to like be seen. I didn't know what was going on. I just wanted to go home. And it's really hard because I felt like completely alienated and isolated and unable to speak to anyone, which is not a good place. And I'm so far from home, and I don't have any access to a cell phone because there's no signal. So there's not even anyone to phone to regulate your nervous system with your husband or with your loved ones. It's just like, okay, I'm in this terror and my tinnitus is out of control. That was day one. And I did another 6 days of that before the big, big fallout happened. It was really horrible. Shame. I feel sorry for myself as I say it. It wasn't nice. It really wasn't good.
So how did that end?
So day 6, I was lying, got back, I went to the retreat master, I was sobbing. I said, I'm not coping. I think I want to go home. And they said to me, no, 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 this is all part of it. Just stay with it, stay with it. Tomorrow we're going to have one-on-one sessions and then we'll help you. Just stay with it. And I just was like, I'm not doing well here, Went back to the room, tried to get into my bed, and I remember thinking, okay, well, this old stuff, this old material is about to break through, and I'm just trying to breathe. And it's now 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night. So between 12 and 3 o'clock that night was probably, I don't know what happened, but it must have been the worst trigger of old trauma that I had thought. I mean, I was bordering on 50, Willoughby. I thought I'd done it. I've done the therapy. I've done recovery. We've talked about the childhood stuff. I know it. I know the material. But it felt like that material was just like something cracked open and the material came in, and I was no longer a 50-year-old woman lying there. It was like a 6-year-old. It was just terror. In Cheetah House terms, we call it non-referential terror. I think that's a term that you used, which really helped me. But it was non-referential terror. And I just thought, well, I'm dying and no one's coming and these people are all dangerous, and it was really awful. And I made the conscious effort to pick up my phone, find signal, phone my husband at 3 o'clock, and I said, I'm really panicking. And he said to me, Mandy, come home now. Phone someone to come and fetch you and come home. Forget about this stuff. And so I phoned the taxi man that took us, and luckily there was a sort of like, thank goodness, um, life unfolded in a positive direction, because the man said, I'm coming to fetch you, and this isn't the first time this has happened, just wait for me. And he was like 2.5 hours away, but he was there by 5:30, and that calmed me down a little bit. It was like, okay, someone's coming. My bags were packed, and what was so difficult was everybody else was just sleeping like calmly and getting ready for the I even remember watching one woman. I think she was doing like a yoga practice in the morning while I'm having a complete like something happening here. It seems like everybody's just oblivious to you, like you there, but nobody really cares. It was just bizarre. And I left, and to this day, no one's called. Like I always say, I might as well have died, or I could have had an accident on the way back to the airport. But no one phoned me after that retreat to find out where's the girl that was crying yesterday and really dysregulated. And I think that was the first sort of recognition that this sort of very compassionate idea of that is espoused in this particular framework, it wasn't that compassionate to me. I was like, why, wouldn't the person be more important? And that's when I came home, and thank goodness I Googled trauma, old trauma, in the present, mindfulness, meditation, and you popped up. You were like a light in the darkness, Willoughby. And I think I called you. I think I emailed you. I think I emailed you with my story, and the rest is history. And I'm really grateful to you. I'm really grateful.
So not to make an advertisement for myself, but what happened during that time? Like what? Yeah.
You had a session with me, and the first thing you said to me is that you normalized it. You didn't shame it. You normalized it. And it wasn't the first time you'd heard it, which was a relief, because when you're going through it, you feel like you're the only one, and there's a huge amount of shame. I mean, not only was I a meditation mindfulness teacher, but I had to talk to my community. I had to decide, do I continue teaching, which I stopped teaching. I've never gone back. I had to decide what to do with my own meditation practice, and I didn't know where to start with any of this. I had to try and decide, what do I believe in. My whole worldview had collapsed. My whole framework, everything that I had based the last couple of years on was gone, and I didn't feel like doing that at 50. I'd done that. I thought I'd had it all like neatly packaged. It was like also neat, and now it was in a mess. And I remember you saying, "You haven't broken your brain. Um, you're going to be okay. We'll stay with you, and write your story." I'll never forget you, Mandy. Write your story from beginning to end. Write what happened to you and send it to me. I'll remember that. And I did do that. And that was the beginning of writing also. And I think I think the combination of those things made all the difference. And at Cheetah House now, you know how important narrative is, you know how important the story is, and how it can heal and bring that self that feels so fragmented. For me, it brought something back to wholeness. And then the second thing you said is don't be afraid of medication. And I got support for the extreme anxiety that I was having, but also I went back into therapy, and I had an incredible therapist who said, I said to her, I never want to see another Buddhist book. I want to burn every Buddhist book I ever had. I feel like such a failure. I was having, and she said to me, Mandy, let's just calm down. Let's slow it down. And I'm still with her. She still supervises me now, but she said to me, maybe you can make something out of this. Like maybe there's something to be um, retrieved from this experience that can support others going forward. And I had no idea what she was talking about. I was like, I don't know who I'm supposed to support. She said, maybe don't give it all up, just pause. So I didn't give it all up. And thank goodness later on, I got the privilege of meeting Mark Williams, and he did help me a lot. He did help me find some relevance in some of the practices, and I'll speak to that a little bit later. But he really was amazing. He was very good to me also.
So I know you have a plan of what order you want to say things in. So I don't want to like, you know, ask too many questions that are going to skip over your chapters, but um, you know, in reference to what you just said, like you might be there to help others. Um, that's what you do. You help others at Cheetah House. And actually, just to tell everyone, Mandy is like our most popular care team member. Everyone likes to sign up for Mandy. And that thing that she wrote, that when I asked her to tell her story, she actually wrote an entire book and published it. So just to give you a sense of Mandy's overachieving, you still haven't cured yourself of that.
I have
Um,
not cured myself.
but you're there for, so I don't know if you want to go into that direction of like becoming, you know, maybe it's a tandem story. Like you stopped teaching MBSR, but you started to become a care team member. Like tell us about those decisions.
Yeah, I think you know, when I came to the support groups in the beginning, I think there were 10 of us in that support group. I can't remember. It was quite a while ago. And those support groups used to be at 11 p.m. South African time, and I wouldn't miss them. So 11 till 12 o'clock at night, and then I'd still have to work the next day. But there was something in those support groups that was different. And what I was, these are the three things that I was sensing in those support groups that had been different and I suppose a little bit aligned to, I'm in recovery from codependency. I've been in recovery for many years, but the recovery framework works for me. And there was an alignment there. And the alignment was around self-agency, boundaries, and no frameworks being imposed, you know. It felt like there was something there that was very different to any other group I'd ever been. And I think one of the other things that I loved about it was you were encouraging me to, through the group process that I learned, to be non-compliant, as in put your camera off, as in say no, as in don't just trust me. I'm like, oh wow, I've never heard that. It's always been trust me, I know what you need. I think I've been hearing that a long, long time in my life. And suddenly I thought, well, I like this. Something was happening in those groups. And then, I mean, it was 2 years. I think we hardly saw each other for a long time. I went to the groups, and then you said, Mandy, you know, would you look at this training? And I started looking at some of your materials and some of Jared Lindell's stuff and some of the stuff you guys were doing. And then that's the first time I started understanding what Buddhist modernism meant. And that term was really important for me. You know, this idea that, you know, Buddhism is sort of, you know, it's universal and it's mindfulness is extremely positive mostly. And that was my experience of it. You know, we weren't told of any of the negative effects of mindfulness. There was no sort of informed consent of what could happen even as a teacher, let alone a practitioner. And that idea of 1 in 10 has a significant adverse event is very aligned to the same with addiction. 1 in 10 people will get addicted. 9 out of 10 people can recreationally use anything. And so I've always advocated for the 1 in 10 person. It's just who I am, the mentally ill, the people suffering. It's just being who I am. So I thought, wow, you know, if 1 in 10 people are suffering from meditation, extrapolate that out with all the apps and things that are going on and figure out how many people are feeling in absolute distress with no one to talk to. And so slowly I thought, do I commit to this? Because if I commit, I commit. I won't do it half-heartedly because I don't think it's fair to anybody. And it took me a long time. You said make the decision, Mandy, and then let me know. And slowly you encouraged me, and I decided I love the person-centered approach, and it's informed a lot of what I've learned at Cheetah House and from clients. Let me tell you, Willoughby, the clients, and a lot of them are in this room, I've learned a lot from. They're like, they are teachers, all of them, because they've been through their own incredible journey. And so I'm grateful. I learn every time I support someone as a peer supporter. I learn. And so, yeah, it's been an amazing journey to come into this work. So does that answer a little bit? I'm certainly an advocate now for a couple of things, which I'll say at the end, but I'm certainly an advocate for being really cautious around mindfulness programs, particularly with kids and in schools, and anybody that's had past trauma and current trauma. Actually, I'm really clear about being a lot more, clear about those things.
So while we're on that topic, it might have been lined up differently in your outline, but what would you, I mean, I think that we talked and you decided that the MBSR was not changeable enough to be able to continue teaching it. And so in it, but there have been other teachers that have just, gutted it and are still teaching it, but in a very, very different way. So from your perspective, what are some of the things that you would like meditation teachers to know that really are not negotiable? Like, this is what needs to be in place for you to be teaching meditation. Like, what are some of those non-negotiables for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think the first thing for me would be to make sure that as a teacher, you're as ethical as possible in terms of your own mental well-being and where you're at. Um, you know, you absolutely cannot be teaching mindfulness to 12 or 24 people, like 12 people for one teacher, 24 two teachers. But you cannot be teaching mindfulness if you yourself are burnt out, exhausted. And I know, I mean, life happens, but for the most part, psychologically well-being, and make sure you're in supervision and make sure that you're doing your work. But the other non-negotiables for me are to be sort of impeccable with your word. You're holding people that are entrusted to you, and time frames. Body scan for me is just a practice that has to have so many guardrails, like allow people to stand, allow people to have eyes open. The breath is never neutral. And I think that's what Mark Williams and David Treleaven's book was also just really, really important for me. The breath is not neutral, and people struggle with closing eyes and going to the breath. I certainly did. So to have different anchor points and teach different anchors, and that's not in MBSR for the most part initially. I mean, you're kicking in straight into awareness of breath and long body scans. And yeah, I just, this idea of letting people lie together, it never occurred to me. But yeah, my country, the country that I work in is and I mean, I'm not just saying my country, but there's just huge amounts of trauma, and you can't ask people to just feel comfortable with that. So I was used to encourage bringing a blanket or bringing something soothing or taking a tea break. I was very loose with my instructions. My co-teacher was like, Mandy, you're not disciplined enough. We can't tell people they can only meditate for 3 minutes. I said, why not? If that's all they want to do, let them only do 3 minutes. If they want to get up and have a cup of tea, I'm very around that. And I think maybe that was just intuitive. But I can't teach a structured MBSR program, not because it doesn't offer people support. I think a lot of people have gained incredible amounts of support. I myself gained support from it. Now that I know what I know after I've seen and the people that I've worked with, I can't go back to teaching an 8-week MBSR. And I would just encourage, I do informal practice. I don't meditate anymore, but I like doing informal practice, washing the dishes and waking up a little bit, or going for a little walk and waking up, or listening to music and listening to the music intently. That's mindfulness. That's absolutely fine. So lots of different ways to practice this, but I think I've been too touched by what I've heard in the hours that I've done as peer support to be able to teach again, which is pretty was a big decision for me because it was a big part of my life for a really long time.
So one other thing I remember you talking about was how horrified you were by how Buddhist MBSR is, that you really had been told that it was scientific and secular, and then as you got further into the teaching, it became apparent that it had a whole bunch of roots that were not severed. And it was sort of required to be a fairly committed Dharma student. How did that play out for you?
Um, I'll never forget the first little sort of cohort of teaching MBSR, and they were talking about the Dharma and the Sangha, and I didn't know what those terms meant. It was like language rank. I thought, what does that even mean? You know, I was in my early 30s. I knew nothing about Buddhism. I wasn't raised in that tradition. So I thought, well, you better go and shine up a little bit and start reading a bit about what Dharma is. Google Dharma, you know. Oh, okay, it's interesting. Um, yeah, it came as a shock to me, and I think that was on the fourth retreat at MBSR, where finally sort of like some proper Dharma teachers were coming in, and we were learning the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. And I was thinking, but what happens about some of the teachers in this cohort that might not have a Buddhist framework? How do you? And as I started supervising, I got supervisees that were saying, this is not my belief system, and I'm really getting like I'm struggling with this. That I think should be right up front. I think it should be made fairly. I think it is now. I mean, John Kabat-Zinn's very much about saying, you need to understand the Dharma and be a Dharma teacher for the most part. So now there is informed consent. But what was happening for my participants that used to come on when I did the pre-course interview, we're a very Christian country, and they'd say, like, I don't believe in Buddhism and I don't want anything to do with Buddhism. Does this have anything to do with Buddhism or Eastern philosophy? And I used to say, no, we're going to teach it a secular medical mindfulness program. And that's how I taught it. Um, but that wasn't entirely true, right?
But you didn't
That
know
wasn't
that.
true.
So you weren't
I
actually
didn't know.
lying to them at the time, but now you would be.
Well, now I would say to people that came to me with that pre-course interview objection and say, look, this is the reality. It's based on Eastern philosophies, and how do you feel about that, and how would you work with that in the program? Would you continue? So I think that's an important part of the pre-course interview for sure. Yeah.
Mhm.
So
So,
to answer your
yeah.
question, I have moved past it. I think there's a lot of beauty in Buddhist philosophy. But I'm not a Buddhist, and I wouldn't be. I was never going to be a Buddhist. But I really wanted to understand it. And it confused me for the most part. I wrote, I mean, we unpacked this in the beginning, but no self, no problem became a huge problem for me. I need myself. I need a strong sense of self. I certainly had enough. I just put myself together. In Coda, we talk to thy own self be true. So then how can I dissolve myself? Or what does that even mean at the end of the day? And it was causing me those framework confusions and the ambivalence, it was causing me to become increasingly disconnected from my life, from my husband, from my at one point I remember my husband going, Mandy, okay, well, shall I buy you like a little orange robe, and like what are you going to do next? Because like you're starting to. He was very supportive, but I was losing myself in it. And I turned off music. I wouldn't play music in the car because that's frivolous, and it's like you have to be completely present all the time with. So I stopped music. So then I would stop anything that's fun also. And before I knew it, my whole life became so harsh in practicing. To what end, I don't know. I was punishing myself. I don't know what I was doing. It felt punitive. There was nothing left.
Yeah, I mean, you've talked about adult child of alcoholic and the trauma symptoms and this pattern that you're mentioning, this people pleasing pattern, this like trying to avoid conflict. This is just something that we see over and over again at Cheetah House, and it makes sense that first of all, it's a very adaptive, successful survival mechanism, and you know, you wouldn't have been like
100%.
a top
100%.
corporate executive without it. But, you know, and like you said, it kind of makes you susceptible to these cultic influences because the way it works is that you're scanning for like how do I like get an A in this class? How do I be the top student? How do I avoid being punished, right? And so you know that like you have like spidey sense for how do I ace this class? And so, you know, it doesn't take, you know, a rocket scientist to be in an MBSR situation where you're like, okay, like I'm getting very strong messages that I need to know everything about Buddhism and all these, you know, then you start reading Buddhist, you know, and what go to the most hardcore version of it, and
Mhm.
yeah, you start eradicating your sense of self, you start wearing robes, you start not, you know, not listening to music because entertainment is a sin, and you know, you are becoming the perfect Buddhist, but you are losing Mandy.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
it takes a while to figure that out.
took a while to figure that out. And also, the point that I want to make is, as a child, I learned how to dissociate. It was one of the, it was a survival mechanism for me, and so I think I think it just makes sense how easy in the beginning, well, not easy, but how comfortable it felt to meditate because it's almost like it felt like a spiritual bypass, like a trance state. It felt like a state that I was used to. I could do it for hours; it would be fine. But what I wasn't recognizing is that I was losing associations with other things also, you know. And I want to make this point too that at Cheetah House that I've learned, and it's one of the things that has been most beautiful for me, is that it's okay to be light. It's okay to build associations to things that I love. And I've started to what culminated in my recovery whilst I was at Cheetah House was starting to draw, do art, write very bad poetry sometimes, very bad poetry. Um, but I started just enjoying, just starting to connect with something that was lost. And, you know, as a child, I used to like who I was. I was wild. I loved kicking rugby balls and playing cricket and jumping off roofs and making up little magic games. And I just enjoyed, but something got lost along the way. And there's been a reclaiming of that. There's been a reclaiming of lightness, of appreciation and awe of life. Um, Meditation to the degree that the non-dual awareness makes absolutely no sense to me anymore. And yeah, it doesn't feel safe to me to do that. So recovery has been helpful. Recovery from meditation adverse events. What I will say is the thing that I'm still working on, that is still really tricky, is the hyperreflexivity, the sort of hyper nowness and the hyper attunement to every small thing in my body. Um, I have to untrain that. My husband once, he woke me up to it. He said, you know, Mandy, you never used to be so attuned to every small thing happening in your body. And the thing for me is once for me, once I was diagnosed with cancer, that heightened my anxiety to watch out for potential things that can be going wrong, you know, like this ache, that pain, that it heightened my anxiety. And by then I'd been doing so many body scans that's almost impossible not to body scan anymore. So every small thing, and I'm really unlearning that. And I've heard that a lot from clients at Cheetah House. That is also a touch point. It's like, how do I unlearn this super hyper nowness? It's exhausting. So that is still something that I'm working with.
Hmm.
Yeah, I just wanted to name that. I think it's
Hmm.
important.
So, in terms of your being on the care team, there's a bunch
Mm-hmm,
of other care team members. So, if
mm-hmm.
somebody is trying to decide which care team member to see, what do you think you're good at? What do you think you're like a good choice? I have my own things I could say about Mandy, which I will, but I want to hear Mandy's own answer first.
um, so I think what I bring. I've been working for many, many years with families in crisis and extreme crisis around addiction, whatever. And I'm quite attuned and loving to suffering. And I don't, when someone is extremely dysregulated and in pain and hurting, I can be with that. It's okay. I can be with that because I think I've, for most part, been with my own. I think compassion and care and love and listening, really listening, can actually make a huge difference. Because I think one of the things around this, and you've named this, is this feeling of self-recrimination, like I've done something really bad to myself. This is my fault. No one gets it. And there's even like victim shaming, you know, like, oh, you did this, now you deal with it. And I don't buy into that with addiction. I certainly don't buy into it with meditation adverse events either. So I do bring that. Yeah, and I love learning. I love being around people that have been through something, that have a narrative and a story that's interesting. And I don't give up. I don't give up on people. I never have, and I won't start now. And I think this can either be, for me, it was a really, really dark night. It really, really was a dark night. But there's a lot that's come out from it that's changed me. It's changed me, and you know, I don't want to be like Pollyanna about it. Oh, it's changed me for the better. You know, no, it's not that. It's my heart's a little bit broken on aspects of feeling a bit betrayed by certain things, and I know what that feels like. But I can help people and support people through that betrayal feeling, through that, by just listening and being present to it and getting them to speak their narratives, and the extraordinariness that they don't see, because I didn't see it in myself. I mean, Willoughby, you helped me see a lot of my own courage and strength. You reflected it back for me. That's useful.
Well, that was pretty much what I was going to say was, if you feel like a puddle of shame, like you're so ashamed of your just existence, Mandy is your person.
Thank you.
That's, yeah.
Yeah. No,
So
no need for that.
before we close this part of the session, I just want to give you a chance to say anything that you want to make sure that you say, because this is also, we're meeting Mandy, but we're also letting, you know, people know important things that we know that we want to make sure the world knows. This is going on YouTube. So, you know, is there anything that you want to make sure that people know about anything, meditation, before we close?
Yeah. I think there are two things that I feel are important. The one is that, if for parents, I'd say this for parents, that on YouTube there is just a plethora of apps and YouTube channels with all manner of different teachers and different frameworks that young people can just click onto that are feeling distressed. For the most part, there's no informed consent or disclaimers up front. And some of the Cheetah House clients that I've seen have been really, really impacted by just doing one app or just doing one practice or one retreat or one. So to really just bring awareness to that. I don't know how we do it as Cheetah House, but we're doing it more as this education, I think, of the dangers of these sorts of apps. I also feel like at Cheetah House, maybe one of the things that I'm picking up is that there needs to be family support, even of the parents of meditators in distress. I hear that sometimes also. And the fallout in relationships, husbands with wives, or parents with children feeling disconnected from family members, that sort of thing. I have an interest in and trying to understand that, and how that works. But what I will say just also that I think is important, some of the stuff on the Cheetah House website, the dissociation series, some of the interviews that you've done, and some of the work that you've done there, Willoughby, are just, people don't underestimate what you can learn from some of those things if you're feeling lonely or lost. There are so many rich resources, and you know, you gave those out in the beginning to me at absolutely no charge. You know, you just said, yeah, just inform yourself. And I'm very grateful to Cheetah House for that. So I think use the website. That's what it's there for. Reach out to Cheetah House. For the most part, we will try and support how we can. That's the ethos of the organization. And I'll just say lastly, the thing that I'm prioritizing now, going into this part of my life, is really getting clear about my own values, my own frameworks, not listening to what everybody else has got to say, taking inputs, but really finding it for myself. I think I listened to far too many people with far too many opposing frameworks, trying to comply too much, and I completely confused myself. And maybe that happened for a good reason, and it's given me an opportunity now. But there are key team members that can really help you with that, really trained, really fascinating people that can support you through framework clarification. So I wanted to just make that known. And then lastly, if you're compulsive, if you are struggling with your own mental health, if you're obsessive, if you have had trauma, please be gentle with yourself. Please reach out. It's a big deal. Having an adverse event is a big deal. It can impact you for a couple of months. It can impact you for even a year or two, but don't give up. There is support for sure, really. I think it's one of the really important things if you struggle with anxiety, and I do. So what I've been doing is, okay, stop all meditation. But what I've been doing in the beginning, when I didn't know how to do that, I had to get back into my body in a different way, in an explosive way. I know it sounds weird, but the cold swimming, weight training, anything that's grounding and pulls you out of the inside of your body is really useful. And so, cold showers, all that vagal tone stuff, which I've read up on now, is really helpful for me. And the minute I start feeling into my body or feeling sensations in my body, I just go Mandy. It's really, really, I talk to myself and say it's not useful. Or I'll say, for example, I'll say to myself, it's just anxiety, and these are some of the symptoms of anxiety. And at Cheetah House, we've got that hyperarousal list that Willoughby sent out. I don't know if you've ever received it. I think we might even have gone over it, but it was helpful for me. It says, there's shakiness or there's this going on. That's just anxiety and hyperarousal in the body. It's not something else going on. So it's almost like retraining my mind to a sense of understanding what is hyperarousal, how's it happening in my body. Does that make sense? Because the training for body scan was simply find the sensation, amplify it, and then let it go over and over and over and over. It's maddening. Don't even know why would we do that to ourselves? I have no idea. It doesn't make any sense to me now. Does it help? I really hope you find a way through, and I'm happy to continue supporting. And if I find anything, maybe some others can also share around that. But yeah, cold swimming helped me. I got into that pool. The answer around what you were naming is the anchor being outside of myself. So the anchor being sound, or the anchor being bum on the seat, feet on the floor. Different anchors are really useful. If there's only one specific anchor of eyes closed, go in, and that for me, like I said, the breath is a neutral. Does that answer a little bit of what you were saying around that? Kind of. So how do you titrate with the so that you don't go into dissociation? That for me was critical, was the fact that I was given multiple options of different anchors that felt much more safe and much more outside of me. Was a way for me not to, the minute I went in and I went into non-dual awareness, I started just clicking off further and further and further, to the degree, I think in one of the retreats, I felt like I was floating above my body. And I got such a fright. I thought, how do I get back into my body? And I didn't know that was derealization, depersonalization, dissociation. I was told that's a very, very profound experience and I must keep going. I'm on a fantastic path. I was like, no, this doesn't feel good. this feels like I left my body, you know. So anchoring, grounding was very important for me. I actually remember one of the teachers at the time who was doing mindfulness-based cognitive therapy for depression, and I've got the vest. He had designed a grounding vest. It's like you put it on your body when you're doing practice, and it actually forces you to feel heavy. I actually used that and it was helpful. I used it. It was really, really helpful. I didn't feel like I was going to fly. Does that make sense? It grounded me, it pushed me down. You know, shame dies on exposure. That's the only thing I can say. When I shared with my community in South Africa what had happened to me, they were really, really kind. Um, I've left that community now because I no longer feel like I need to teach. But at Cheetah House also, there's no shaming. There's no shaming of what you feel and what's happening to you. Um, so I think a sense of community and a sense of doing group work and support work at Cheetah House is critical to hear other people's experiences. Um, some of the impacts have been quite interesting. And the first thing I do is we have a WhatsApp support group. There's weekly supervision and self care at Cheetah House that Willoughby and Scott have organized, and extensive training and at any point I can put on a WhatsApp group if I've had a difficulty, and somebody will respond, and someone will even say, "Do you need to have a conversation?" And I think it's critical for us because, yes, you're right. Some of it is really the touch point for me afterwards is I can't believe how someone's life has been impacted by something that they weren't informed about. And the impact for me is, especially when it's young people, I mean, it's not any different for old, but like to have your life like really shaken like that before you've even started identifying who you are is it's really sad for me, and it stays with me. I feel sad for, and then I can talk to people about it in supervision. There's a lot of support. Thank you, Sarah. It's a great question. It's a very supportive community, I must say. Um, yeah, we've all been through it, so we know. Yeah. But I can only speak from first person, and I think for me, you know, I had very carefully compartmentalized what my psyche could not deal with, and it was very comfortable to have that material in a denial state. And you know, it's fine to have that slowly, gently opened up in recovery and in therapy and whatever. But the problem is with meditation, I just didn't realize how that could be pried open at the most inopportune when my defenses were so down. Suddenly this material came up and I didn't know what to do with it. And I thought I just neatly dealt with it. I don't know how the psyche works in that way, but I think you recognize, Elizabeth, what I'm saying, because I think you've had your own experiences, and yeah, I mean, it's always interesting speaking to you around that also. But maybe Willoughby can also just share a little bit, if you don't mind, Will, because I know you know a lot about that. So
Yeah, so the kind of de-repression of traumatic material, like there's basically two kinds of ways that we think that that can be triggered. One is simply that this is a hyperarousal symptom, and it's, it gets also other things can correspond with it, like anxiety and panic and involuntary movements and, all kinds of things like that. So the increased arousal can be caused by simply like that there's the systems of the brain that are associated with arousal are also associated with attention. So if you think about like the drugs that people take to improve attention, like coffee and Adderall and amphetamines, then if you take more of that, more coffee or more amphetamines, you're going to have a panic attack at some point. You're definitely going to stop sleeping. So there's an arousal of, kind of effect of attention itself and of the ramping up of the attention systems. So that's one possibility, that like you're basically just ramping up the entire system, and one of the side effects of that is flashbacks. So we call that the high road. The low road is the opposite, where you're getting calmer and calmer and calmer and calmer, and the prefrontal cortex is actually suppressing the limbic system. The first one would be that the limbic system gets disinhibited.
Mm.
The second one is that you get calmer and calmer, and the limbic system gets suppressed. And actually, you start to move. Like if you look at the neuroscience of meditation and the neuroscience of dissociation, there's a lot of overlap. And one of those overlaps is the prefrontal control over the limbic system. And so basically what happens is the meditation is you're doing everything right and you're getting calmer and calmer, but it's actually starting to mimic a freeze response, a dissociative response. And so, if you once you get into that place, if you have any of that dissociative freeze, traumatic content, you basically like go straight into it. You're like getting into the same physiology that was in place when it got locked in there in the first place. And then it can just pop open. So I see that a lot with people. They're like, everything was going great. I was super calm, super concentrated. And then suddenly, like they say, that just cracked open and like everything started flying out. But I was from a calm place. And you also will see that in the literature if you Google relaxation-induced panic or relaxation-induced anxiety. Relaxation itself can have this triggering effect where it's almost like the defense mechanisms are just they're just gone. Like it just you kind of erode your own defense mechanisms. So those are the two kind of hypotheses that we have.
Yes, I do. I believe you put one thing down. If you're addictive by nature, which I am compulsive and addictive by nature, if I put down one thing, I'll pick something else up and I'll do it compulsively and I'll do it addictively, whether it's work. I mean, many can attest to the mind. I don't work half-heartedly. If it's sport, I'll hurt something. If it's and I did the same with spiritual bypassing. It was a trance state. It was easy for me. It was one way of managing my pain without looking at it. It 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 looks like you're looking at your pain. It certainly feels that way, and from the outside you're going on all this sort of spiritual retreat stuff, but actually it's a question that Scott asked. Um, yeah, 100%. I see it all the time with the other work that I do in the world. Increasingly involved in contemplative, deep spiritual practices, and like they say, you can't white knuckle through recovery. You really got to do the work. Yeah, so it's a great question. Something I always have to look at. Yeah, 100%.
I'll just add that I can't tell you how many times, somebody's telling their story from beginning to end and they say, "Well, I'm one of those people that does everything 150%." And I'm like, I hear that just you're like, "Yep, here we go again," and it's the same. You can't do meditation like that. It's not going to go well. So yeah.
Great. Thanks, Elizabeth. And um, didn't get any more questions. We are pretty close on time anyway, though. So this might be a good place to kind of wrap it up. Before, though, I do want to, just as a friend to Mandy, p- share the book that Mandy
Hey.
wrote. It's called Inner Intimacy, Reclaiming Wholeness. And what I really like about it is it's very Mandy in that it's um, a bit genreless, like it's a biography, but also there's poetry, there's like practices, but all very like informed and in your own unique way. So just sharing that as a friend, it's been on my
Thank
bedside
you.
table. Yeah, it's great.
Thank you.
And anything else you want to say before you go,
No,
Mandy?
just thank you. Thank you so much for everyone arriving. The imposter in me would think, oh, maybe only one person will arrive. So it's really special that people actually came out, and to see some people that have entrusted themselves with me to listen to their stories. It's really lovely to reconnect with you and those that I don't know, and also just fellow peer supporters. And thanks, Willoughby, for for trusting me with this work. It's been amazing. I will continue to do it. I love it. Yeah, thank you.